Hopefully the sound is okay. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Today we are having our Mish-Mashing Lounge rather than Mix and Mash. Therefore, there are likely to be less slots in our Pacific Rim. I did not watch this movie enough for that to be happening to me. Anyway. You can join our lounge if there is a space open and you are anywhere on the Atlantic Rim with fairly good internet. Midwesterners can often join, but you may have bad connections to some team members or lounge members. So, at your discretion. With such a large lounge, it may take a while to get to your match, and therefore you might not want to actually just get unlucky enough for it to be laggy. But for the most part, you can assume that if any of the big characters or grapplers are playing, when your turn comes up, it should be fine. And depending on the connection and how long the other person who has been playing has been winning, you can just sit there a little bit and not necessarily confirm and see if they decide to drop the back to give you a chance to fight someone with a better connection. It is going to be a little light on discussion. We are mostly looking for gaps in offense, and not only gaps, but often punishes are very strict as well in certain specific ways. Which isn't actually a focus that we have a lot of the time. Outside of bots, tight punishes of specific techniques used by other people, not just first order stuff, isn't necessarily something one spends a lot of time doing. Rather, at our level, one doesn't spend a lot of time doing it. Because we spend a lot more time figuring out how to beat strategies and how to deal with weird situations than specifically, is this move minus enough that I should do this thing. But that means that we've got almost all of the gang available, which means also that you're going to see a lot of armoring through things. And this is one of the strongest ways to take advantage of those gaps in this game. Footsie characters like Chun-Li and Karine more so take advantage of someone trying to do something that will whiff using their walk speed. They don't always need as much understanding of this aspect of it. Okay, my opponent is attacking, they have to stop sometime, or they have to go for something slightly risky before they become so predictable that I can just parry or armor my way relative to their options. We also see for today that our president is in fact playing G once again, and not only playing G, but playing G with V trigger 2, which suits the narrative for today, as G's V trigger 2 is in fact armoring through things once again. Perfect time on the back jump medium kick. Cutting it kind of close, but I guess it would be very difficult for the G to react to that with super in that time frame. It is actually through this understanding that those gaps exist that you can create them in your own way, based on expectations of your opponent to get through situations. You can also do much gutsier things simply because you don't expect your opponent to react to it. If you've taught them, there's no gap here, or if you see me stop, it's not a gap, I'm just stopping, you can change your flow quite a lot. Dropped. But a good throw reset that goes there. And lots of presidentiality. This part is always hard for Abigail, but there is at least one solution. That should be to walk your opponent all the way to the corner so they can't walk back anymore. You can also, of course, as you've just seen, use armor to convince your opponent there will be a gap and use armor in the gap space instead, which will get you out of a ton of things. Unfortunately, President did not have enough power, presidentiality or otherwise, to finish that up, making it a little bit harder to close this out. Not necessarily too hard, but definitely rough.
She wins.
Abigail's solutions to that work much better at much higher health when one can just use Avalanche and see if it gets you through or hope for the best or similar things. Because there's a very tight timing where Abigail can Avalanche through that, but it's really tight timing. Why would you stress yourself that much? Since she can counter basically anything else, this match actually is more or less occurring at a different spacing and timing than you'd think. It looks as if Abigail loses basically because it's impossible to get through projectiles, but it's more so that Abigail loses because G needs to be in the corner to lose. This is why we've mentioned before on the stream that the main tool Abigail has for this matchup is actually to free reversal G in many situations, which pushes G further and further back very quickly. The earlier this is done within the match, the more power Abigail has to control it, as G is not super good at getting over Abigail's head for any reason. It also creates many situations where rolling is a thing and so on. This also forces G to use more energy to push Abigail back earlier in the game, leaving less super and similar for finishing off at the end.
She wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
I'll fight this battle. Why?
Round one. Fight.
It's another great match for discussing the gaps and similar situations. Because once again, we have a character that needs to use a very specific timing and a certain amount of calm to get through a very small gap. Specifically, Karin's use of Orochi to move herself around in this matchup, but then also needing to jump out or light kick out of G's pressure, and from G's side, the same sort of thing happens. Because G is able to space Karin so well to specific places, backdashing allows to create a gap that G can use. And at max range of Karin's normals, gaps just automatically exist. Fortunately for Karin, G's cross-up options aren't so great, especially not on the neutral jump, making G one of the few characters where she can just seppo further, seppo longer, and similar in order to play neutral. If she goes under G while G is neutral jumping, unlike many characters, it's not likely to be a lot of damage. But you can see the spacing creating the gaps already. When facing a character who is not able to keep you this far away, Karin gets to hit her combos, even if they're going to be blocked, but G will hit. And G's moves don't tend to extend a hurt box quite early enough for trades to happen easily. Meaning that Karin has to rethink a lot of things in terms of how long can I hit buttons, how many gaps am I creating here, and what gaps should I be creating.
Round one. Fight.
Hence the light kick. It does a better job in most cases than her other options, but she does still have to jump out of certain situations. This is mostly because G's air resets aren't that great. Characters that have fast dashes tend to have better air resets, and G's dash is not that fast, so... Her crouch heavy punch also has a specific space, and is useful because while it will be punished like everything else, it doesn't actually often get blocked in the space we're talking about. But President is controlling the space of this matchup pretty well.
Round two. Fight.
Which is going to require a whole, like, holistic mindset, feeling sort of thing from Karin. Since, of course, that light kick is not going to get a ton of damage here. Which means G gets to block a lot of things. This creates a nice flowing uncertainty. Specifically, should I be moving away from this opponent or attempting to hit buttons? And the answer is that technically both are wrong and you need to jump forward. The secondary reason the jump forward works so well is because when the opponent's situation is unclear, their best option is to backdash. And while G's backdash is just about quick enough that you'll get something out of it, it's not that great. Light punch anti-air is still worth it, but it's hard to say exactly how much G can generally get,
Let's do this.
as his other anti-airs, while relatively good in terms of their coverage are not so great in terms of their speed or accuracy. They don't attack as much space as, say, a Shoryuken or a Laura stand medium punch when it comes to aerial stuff.
Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Mika wins. Round one. Fight!
Justfine has to be careful here about when she uses her mic and how long, given Nakali's ability to go through it. And this being one of the hardest reactions in the game in terms of that. Nakali can't walk up to you though, so there is that helpful point. If Nakali has even one step forward, you can release the mic. And if Nakali has taken no step forward, you try to hold it and hope for the best in terms of your own flow. If Nakali jumps, it's much harder to decide what to do about it, but you still have some options. So it's not that you can't use the mic in this matchup, but it does have to be used relative to some distance.
Round two.
And knowing that distance is relatively hard, but that has nothing to do with gaps today, so. This is partially because our Nakali players don't necessarily use a ton of pressure, therefore ending up caring about the gaps. This character also has enough good close-range pressure from various situations that you don't necessarily want to go for a bunch of Nika loops in standard scenarios. It's too risky when you don't feel really confident in your own offense. It's better to just use your punch command grab, send the Nakali flying, and force him to close distance again while you get something. This is important against certain types of characters quite often. If the character can't be forced into a place where they're, let's say, wake up, crouch, jab, or whatever, doesn't harm you, put you in any bad situation, nothing. If you can't force that to be just, well, I didn't get my stuff, then you don't often want to go in as much on the character. They might be too good in neutral. They might just be the sort of character that can output a ton of damage quickly, and you dashing in and getting crouch jab could mean half your health. This is particularly true online, where lag can very slightly alter your key timings, your ulti timings, and force you to spend more time thinking about whether or not it's even a good idea to try for them. So this is one of the risk-benefit calculations that definitely is changed by the level of netcode, the level of connection, and so on, relative to any given person you're fighting. How much damage can my opponent do from their defensive wake-up button? And Nikali is fairly high on the list of people who can get big things out of it. As well as having, obviously, just the option to uppercut.
Round 2. Fight.
Crazier Nikalis can do things like wake up command grabs. This doesn't work on most people, but it does have a better chance of working in certain situations than others, because if you go up to Nikali and you think, I'm baiting you now, I'm definitely baiting you. Wake up command grab is, at least when people are not super fast at reacting, super fast at thinking about this, they're not necessarily getting shimmied for the bait, and so on. You can do this because Nikali's crouch light kick doesn't matter that much, but the crouch medium kick is decent, so let's just say there's a lot more to unpack in the close range wake up game against this character than against many. More so in terms of layers than straight options Nikali has. No one will ever tell you Nikali has too many options or much more options than the rest of the cast, but when he goes for some of the crazier ones, you may be in a position where you get much worse health loss from it, and things get shifted around as a result of that.
Let's do this.
I don't know if the bars are lying to us. We've learned to ignore those indicators in a lot of cases now. So, you don't need to assume that because you have no bars to us that we are in fact going to not play or kick you out of the lounge. Even if it lags to one particular person, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And vice versa. You might want to give it a try to play against someone. As long as you are in some way along the rim of the Atlantic and you know your internet is good, you don't need to trust the bars that much. That's for when you're fighting people who you don't know where they live.
Fight.
Very different Nikali now. But most of Mika's options still work the same way. And she can decide how to do certain things. Since Cosmic Wolf plays less of the layered defense, Justfine can often make this decision based on, do I feel like baiting you, and do you have enough meter for an invincible wake in the first place? But But it's not as if none of them are there, so you still have to care about the things like, oh, you woke up with jab into medium punch into whatever. Because it's not always just, I'm going for uppercut now. That is a stress reaction that needs to be made to be built up. In this case. Still, the stress of facing neutral of an undeterred person means that you might be willing to just go for the meaty just to remove that form of stress from your own side. You can manage to de-stress yourself somewhat by just accepting the Oki situation as a completely binary situation. Basically, you go for the meaty and fully expect, well, I might get hit, I might get damage, that's it, I'm just rolling the dice here. Which lets you calm down enough to think, well, hit by what? Of course, facing this skill also means it's much less possible to just use mic at mid-screen. You do almost always have to release it fairly quickly to avoid getting hit by that. And because you do, you're really not going to get hit with anyone. But you can get some beneficial damage out of just getting a little boost to your throws.
Mika wins. Round 1. Fight!
The rest is mostly going to be whiff punish flows. Footsies isn't as required against undeterred opponents because their idea of footsies is more straightforward in many cases. And you can consider that to be better or worse. It generally changes by matchup.
Round 2. Fight!
A good way to think about it is that you have to think more about the timing aspect of footsies than the spacing aspect of it. The opponents of this type will use more options because they're less deterred when those options don't work. And emboldened when the options do work. Generally what this means is that the opponent will have more ways to get to you to hit in positions you otherwise might not be expecting at a greater risk to themselves. And that often means you're not trying to move around to make sure this person's medium kick whiffs because they only ever hit medium kick. You're thinking more so in terms of, do I have the time to hit a button at this range before my opponent hits stays sweep? Because Nakali's sweep is quite fast and reaches decently far. This is a real consideration. Similarly, you have to prime yourself to be ready for more options, and this actually helps heavily to force you into stressful situations. If you have a response or a punish to just Nakali's stand medium kick, for example, well, not Nakali's because it's a short. But if you have to have a response to a stand medium kick and that's basically the matchup for you, it's different from having to be ready to punish sweep, ready to armor through something else, ready to check the pushback on a different move. ready to guard your legs in case of crouch medium kick all at the same time.
Mika wins.
So this too is a form of creation of gaps. Players who will get close and then semi-randomly pick their next button or pick it purely based on range. Whereas it's not always going to work because the range you think is happening is not necessarily the range that is happening. Okay, let's see how much of these lies these bars actually are.
Let's do this.
According to the bars, this should be really laggy, but
Round one.
I can see at least one of these stations. And it's not giving me that impression so far. So yeah, we're just gonna count that as a lie and move on. It's either gonna disconnect entirely, because sometimes it obviously does that, or run smoothly. I'm gonna go with disconnect entirely at this point.
It's go time. Let's do this.
Definitely going to be looking into more of the messy, unstable internet aspects. But we don't know, and we can't find any trace as to why that happens, so we just let things rotate back around a little quicker than normal. None of us are in a rush today. There is still one slot left open in this lounge, and since we are rotating relatively quickly, you can assume that you won't necessarily have to wait through all 7 matches between now and whenever you get your own turn. Just hope that you have good connection to whoever, or that they're noticing that it's probably bad and shifting around, and that you don't miss your turn because we are rotating, which could be annoying because you have to wait so long anyway, but can't necessarily go away.
Round one. Fight.
We're not expecting a lot of joiners today though, so we'll continue with our current flow. Most of Suntier's recent work doesn't actually do much against G. A lot of it has more to do with focus in terms of meter watching, which has to be worked on separately than the more recent actions been taken. Red Fireball, however, does have at least some chance of coming up in a helpful way. The difficulty being that G doesn't really care about it in the same ranges as other characters, and if it's used there, he'll either ignore you or do his wheel kick over it. Probably on reaction. So, while it is a tool available, the practice that has been happening might not be the practice required to use it.
Round 2.
Bringing us back to mostly needing to hit stand heavy punch. And understand meter positioning a lot. One good option Akuma eventually gets, though, is being able to hit the stand heavy punch and then play the fireball game. Not because you expect G to actually get hit by the fireballs, but because the flow that comes out of it is easier to handle if you're also ready for the uppercut. In short, this is closest you're gonna get to old school Street Fighter style zoning situations. Akuma gets to hit attacks and throw fireballs and then just be ready to uppercut when G almost inevitably jumps, because he doesn't have a whole lot of other options here. You can clip with the wheel kick by expecting the fireball, but honestly, in the smallest of gaps, especially if Akuma thought you were going to do this, he'd just uppercut the wheel kick too. The main problem with this is the preciseness required for the spacing, combined with how much meter this tends to build up on G's side with no strong way for Akuma to explosively return it. What I mean by that is, this match, unless played perfectly from Akuma's side for a long time, results in G having a ton of meter to make a comeback with, but if Akuma lost any health during that time, let's say Akuma was here, technically this is kind of what I'm talking about, except for the fact that that meter is running out. If Akuma gets to this health, for example, and G still has both the trigger and all meter, Akuma can be just defeated without a chance to use his own V-trigger to counter it. Fortunately, the beginning part of this match was played perfectly enough that this is going to come down to how well can I use my V-trigger before G gets his own V-trigger back. But no use of V-trigger in this case. There's probably no good opportunities to activate that, and there was at least one combo drop that would have led into the moment to activate it. So we'll count that one as execution fail.
Round 1. Fight!
Strategically speaking, therefore, G's goal isn't necessarily to play this matchup in any strong footsies way or anything. It's more so to make sure that Akuma takes a certain amount of damage before G is forced to activate his own V-trigger. Or, in this case, to make sure that it happens twice. But it's looking like, tactically speaking, this is now quite rough. Because G is slowly losing both health and access to the trigger options. And even with explosive damage like that level, it's still just going to be Akuma's game, without even needing the V-trigger here. One thing that helps a lot with this is just trying to get stray clips with G's V skill, both in the air and on the ground. This will help G get to V-trigger quickly enough that he will possibly get two of them. And since this doesn't always end up with meter usage in this thing, the second round is much easier for G to handle. this type of dominant situation where honestly Akuma doesn't really have a way through this other than playing perfectly for a while or proper use of own V-trigger. The throw game was a good option though, because it does tend to take away quite a bit of G's health and change the mindset that G must play from. Because just getting thrown all the time is terrible, and you don't really want to use all that meter because you want to save it for this round to do more or less the same thing. So you don't want to have to be waking up super to get out of throw loops or worrying about that. The jump being a really good choice there, because had Akuma specifically intended to use the V trigger to make the comeback, while G can absolutely do a lot of damage on anti-airs in certain situations, that probably wasn't one of those situations, meaning that Akuma had just enough health to take one more damage point or so from that jump in to get V trigger, which could then be used.
Akuma wins.
Many of G's anti-airs don't also give him really great Oki. So playing the ground game, faking it out, and then maybe managing a jump. Even if the jump is anti-aired, you might not care. And playing footsies up until that point, without G having any big conversions available, or rather big conversions you wouldn't want to risk, because I think there was at least one option. It's still really good in that space. This is one of the riskier moments though. Akuma hasn't necessarily lost enough health for it to be a big deal, but it's getting close. Fortunately, this is more tactical than that. This has specifically to do with G managing to damage Akuma very heavily while Akuma does not have the trigger available or used yet. It's the overhead escape, decent. But click through. This one's just a spectating error, because I can see from the other station that this match is going on well. I would talk about it, but you can't see it, so it doesn't help at all. I should cheekily say things are going exactly as they should. Everyone is playing exactly as they should play. It's very perfect. Oh, look at that conversion. But more seriously, we are seeing a lot of the same tactical setups and so on. Center playing strong defense to make sure that the conversions don't really end up being too terrible, and using just enough of the fireball game, just enough to keep G on the defensive at a range where otherwise he might, try something. Therefore, this goes to Suntier, and it's about to tell us that spectating cannot be started because reasons. Or maybe it's going to stay at the screen for a while. There we go.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight.
This match is going to be just as rough, if not rougher. The Wolves' specific training recently has been about slipping through gaps in opponents' defensive spaces. And as much as Akuma's defense is at the core decently good, Akuma's buttons don't help with this. Akuma has a lot of gaps in spaces that you can get through. Dive kick helps, perfectly spaced stomps help. Technically, you could count it as this guidance helps because if you only have one option to cover the space, i.e. fireball, and your opponent has an option to, on reaction, go through that fireball that they know must be coming because there's nothing else to hit in the space, then they get to go through it. This makes for a very difficult, specific form of game for Akuma because it involves reaching B trigger and then managing to not use it on anything, just so that he has more options for this available. Backdash does help, but Necalli has enough ways of making use of that to be a problem. He can use it like many characters. This comes up a lot actually. I think I've mentioned it in a very roundabout way for other characters and matchups against Akuma. Akuma's lack of defense at a particular spot, having those gaps that people could slip through, means that Akuma needs to backdash or will react by backdashing in more situations.
Necalli wins.
The thing that's caused there is if you expect Akuma to backdash because he doesn't have any defenses left, any move you use that takes a long time but benefits you, in this case Necalli's V skill 2 or for example Mika's V skill 1, become much more viable. You don't have to worry about am I going to be hit in the moment I choose to do this, because not only can you go I can do this on reaction to my opponent's jump back or backdash. You could go so far as to say, my opponent doesn't have a good defense here, so they're going to want to jump back or backdash, giving you the option to prime yourself to use those tools. It's very complicated, and honestly relatively stressful in certain cases. But it's still there, it's almost always there. Akuma's best option for this to deal with the problem is what he does with its end. Just use light demon flip. Now, this isn't not risky, but when your opposing character can only basically uppercut you, they don't have any... You don't have to deal with Chun-Li or Akami things where you get instant air thrown, or characters who are going to wait for you to land and then do something because they have a command grab that's going to mess you up when you have to choose if to defend or not. Basically, characters that can't catch you in close range loops, and Necalli is one of those characters. While they can absolutely counter the light demon flip, it's among your lower risks, because if you don't want to give them advantage, you can still do something. An easy way to remember it is this: if you're going to do a move and your opponent's most likely action is just to uppercut you anyway, especially since they have to uppercut right away because they don't know which of the options for the move you're going to do, then it really comes down to how much you care about the damage from their uppercut relative to the damage you could get in any other number of situations they can force you into. If you wish to keep control of the match, sometimes you have to take a risk to to make sure your opponent doesn't have time to take control of the match themselves, or at least can't stay mentally focused on it. They can't go, well, this is my spot now, I'm fine, my opponent can't do anything. Because you can always do something that seems crazy, that is definitely reactable, definitely punishable, but doesn't take, you don't get a lot of damage out of it. Part of the reason this works so well against Ed, as we mentioned for example, is that Ed's Psycho Upper is one of Ed's best knockdowns. Basically, Ed gets a lot of Oki off Psycho Upper specifically, but depending on Akuma's spacing and the Light Demon Flip, especially he at Psycho Upper, it not only won't hit, but if it does hit, it tends to hit oddly. So Ed must go, well, I can't use Psycho Upper, I'll have to use some other option. And most of those options have worse Oki. So mid-screen, or even in certain corner situations, Akuma can definitely just go, you know what, I don't feel like letting you take control of this moment. I'm either going to do the Demon Flip because you don't think I'm going to do it, or I've already done the Demon Flip enough that probably you're not going to try to just take control of it. You're going to delay long enough for me to think of something else to do. Maybe I'll backdash, but again, it's no longer, yeah, you're going to backdash because you have no options. It could easily be, yeah, I'm just going to Light Demon Flip because I don't care, I have Ether, I can get around you. Now of course, as with all mind game things, you have to use this, not necessarily sparingly, but at least this is not a solution in itself to anything. This is specifically, I feel like I don't want you taking control of this moment. And then you assess, is this opponent confident enough to try to take control of this moment, or relentless enough to try to take control of this moment? Because if that's the case, then you do the Demon Flip, you'll win, probably. And if you don't win, you don't care. If you've convinced them, maybe I shouldn't do this, they keep on Demon Flipping, then you don't have to Demon Flip anymore. Understanding where that line should be drawn when you go, okay, it's time to Demon Flip versus time to not Demon Flip, is difficult because you can never know for certain, and it can feel really bad to take a risk with a move that everyone will look at it and go, why did you do that? That's so obviously counterable. Yeah, but as Tokido says, if you don't have to take any risks to fight your opponent, you're either not playing at the top level or the game isn't very good.
Nekali wins.
And that is a strong opinion from, as far as most people are concerned, the top Akuma in the world, so is certainly advice that other Akuma can take to heart one way or the other, at least until they've beaten Hiro 10-0. And probably not even then.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight!
Now, you see, this looks like an Akali mirror, but this is really a Urian versus Alex matchup. And if you watch it carefully enough, you'll probably actually be able to see this. The only difference being, the confusing part might be that if you look at it from the perspective primarily of command grabs, you'll get the wrong impression as to who is who. But let's not look in terms of specifically command grabs. What we have is a person whose mental state easily leads to zoning,
Round 2.
although it doesn't necessarily start there, versus someone whose aim is to play spacing, footsies, and make the opponent think a lot, and then whiff punish them or predict their movement. So let's see how it turns out based on that.
Final round. Fight. Nekali wins.
While reactions and reaction speed obviously and most definitely play a part, you should think of it, at least while they're playing, more so in the other way. It's more likely that every reaction will be failed because they've got so much on their plate from thinking about the other aspects of their accuracy, which is the real decider in this match. When can I do this move so that it hits at the max distance? Best timing. Has the optimal reach. Greatest pushback. All of these things are mostly the things they're calculating, and whenever they get them wrong, the situation tends to shift relatively quickly. While there are options for reacting to stuff in time, that being sort of an example, it's not really the main thing you care about when you're fighting Nekali, and particularly not in the Nekali mirror. While this is definitely not what one would call a pure footsies match, they're not necessarily moving around a lot to prevent the other from hitting the correct spot. It's very much so an accuracy and awareness thing. I don't know what the Nekali mirror is like at high level at all. Like, normally I can say something, I can't say anything, I don't know. But if we assume it's an evolution of this, and that players aren't deeply into their own styles, I can absolutely imagine it being similar to this, because Matchable definitely relies on accuracy a lot. Nekali is a good character for knowing your combo routes, knowing your conversions, getting a lot out of it when you go for them. And understanding your opponent's mindset as one of the primary things you can manipulate using that accuracy, using those mind games. Making this matchup relatively hard for Cosmic Wolf because the Wolf is simply slightly better at mind games. So if you're playing the same character with all the same options, it's a mind game thing and one of you is just better at it, then that's what's going to happen. Let's see if this works out or if Just Fine is just locked out of being able to play for the night. Like I said, we still have to investigate what's up with that connection. Some days it's great, some days it's terrible. And in the end, what can you do but call your ISP and tell them, look, I need to become a pro Street Fighter player and y'all are holding me back. What's that you say? Play offline? Are you opening your office lobby for me? No? If it's my internet.
Let's do this.
Well, as usual, that's a bad sign, but as I said, I can see the other station. It is smooth for now. But that never means anything because it's smooth until it stops and then it just stops. So, we'll see how that goes. Often the issue is just between the interestingly geographically closer to each other systems. We don't know why. So, for example, it might be impossible to watch this match because of the problem between this station that is supposed to be spectating it and the one that is being played on. But interestingly not the other, I don't know. I do have a computer science degree, but, well, sort of degree, but networking was my worst subject, I think. Which is odd because I like it, but then, here, learn all of these protocols. Oh no. Anyway. You know what, I'll just let the stream be silent for a bit, since trying to talk about the match is not going to help here. It's all going way too fast. But at least it's going, so hopefully we'll get to see something eventually.
Let's do this.
Okay, let's try this again. Once again, we're expecting this to be smooth up until the point where it's stopped entirely. But we might still get some match out of it. One of the difficult parts for Abigail in this matchup is that Abigail's buttons don't do a really great job of stopping Mika drop kick. Meaning you have to have a reaction some way. It's either parry or armor. And honestly, parry is the only good one because armor tends to behave oddly with it. For one reason or another. But this is made a little bit easier by the fact that Mika has to fight from really far away. But it looks like it's going to be made easier by the fact that they can't fight at all, and therefore it won't come up.
Round 2. Fight.
I'm proven wrong. Why are so many things all to prove me wrong these days? They don't succeed, but I mean, this one does. Anyway, the main reason for this is because Abigail doesn't do great once Mika has cornered him, and she does it relatively easily, caring a lot less than most characters about the effort it takes to do so. She wants to get close, but doesn't have a lot of good options to get close due to Abigail's impressive reach. With the drop kick and the spacings for particular forms of shooting peach being the main way this works out. But both of these moves are just stand parryable. And, as I was about to say, Abigail has to worry so much less about keeping Mika out or avoiding her low attacks. For example, she can't get close enough for slide to just be a good idea. He can whiff punish it too easily. It's not the most intuitive whiff punish, but it's definitely possible. Meaning that Abigail doesn't really need to crouch in the matchup, and not needing to crouch means it's much easier to do stand parry without thinking too hard. Just being able to hit stand medium punch is half this matchup for Abigail, because like, I don't care that you are coming at me, you're too short. Mika is therefore aiming to make this unpleasant enough when she goes for drop kick or fakes a drop kick that something good happens. This is something that's probably going to end up being trained between the two of these players specifically, as while we do have great Mika bots for the purpose, and can use them in many specific ways, our Mika bots are not necessarily consistent enough that you can know which one is going to be which type.
Looks like I've got
Round 2.
Abigail also isn't particularly privy to one of Mika's greatest strengths, that being that at the beginning of dropkick she actually is crouching in a low profile when she is on we start up flying into the air and dropkick, she is technically into high profile plays. And we have recently, as in a couple of days ago, discovered that there's like 2 frames where she does both at the same time. I don't think you could learn to use this except as a general shenanigan style thing, but it's definitely stressful enough. Fortunately for Abigail, this does not really affect anything Abigail does, except that approach medium kick stops being helpful in the matchup as much. By the time you've realized, okay, she's gonna go for this, let me get in position to approach medium kick her, she has already moved into the phase of the drop kick where she's going to go over the move. This of course results in the fact that Mika players really have no good reason to not use dropkick, other than being parried.
Final round. Fight.
However, as you can just see, the fake dropkick is easier to whiff punish, very similar to the requirements for basically everything else. And the push here is to wiggle around in neutral until Abigail loses palm. And Abigail's plan here needs to mostly be, you know what, I'm just not gonna let you stress me out. With all your shouting and energy and stuff, I'm just not, I'm gonna not care. Because I'm like literally 3 times your size and it's not worth my time.
Abigail wins.
One other decent option, is to go into Abigail's reversal stance, basically hold it there the same way that Abigail does against Dhalsim when Mika is far away, simply because she can't really hit Abigail at that point, and it also allows for a reaction in the same place. Seeing her coming at you is the indicator to release and run, meaning that you should get some armor. But this only really helps when Mika has given you a lot of space. Still, it's a good thing to consider against Mikas who got dashed too much to get out of the mid-range situation where she's disadvantaged. Because some people might not want to go constantly for the drop kick. Some people might want to like reposition, see if they can get Abigail to make a mistake. Justfine is not necessarily normally going to aim for that, but she might have to if at some point in future, presumably Amara starts parrying the drop kick more than half the time. It does come up naturally in other reasonings though. Unfortunately for Justfine, you can't really go for the empty jump against Abigail that often. Not only will he punish it, he can also do a lot of stuff to clip you out of the air in other ways, and because not really messing with Abigail's flow otherwise, assuming much calm, it's just gonna get anti-aired most of the time. There's not enough benefit to this. As less and less drop kicks happen, there's more and more chance that the approach medium kick can come back into play. And the game returns to more so what you consider normal, making it basically important for Mika to keep up the drop kick at least enough to make the match
Final round.
harder on Abigail's side, instead of just, oh well, you're just a regular character. Technically somewhat should be feeling like she's nerfed, because if you're not using some of her more oppressive tools, then she's just obviously a very standard character at that point. And Abigail doesn't care a lot about this because he just picks standard style characters off of health alone in some cases. But we got all the way through the match, and once again, despite the 1 bar indicator, the fact that we didn't have it completely stop means that the protocol went fine, and it did in fact play through the whole thing.
It's go time.
So, let's see if this one works as well.
Let's do this.
Hopefully we won't have any more problems from that side, other than maybe the game sticking at the beginning of a round, because that was fun.
I'll show you the divide in our class.
Round 1. Fight. Round 2. Fight.
In any other matchup, this choppiness would be a complete nightmare. No, it's only half a nightmare. These two are familiar and handle each other well, but the specific form of this rollback does make it feel more like the slowdown type of gaming. Hopefully it will resync itself soon enough. I can imagine models in which having geographical closeness causes more jitter. I should probably just read that code again. But we're probably going to continue with this one because it's probably not a thing where the thing causing the problem is also drastically changing the outcome of the match.
You lose.
Well, that one's just one of our controllers having the weirdest bug. Only in Street Fighter, only on menu screens, the X button doesn't work. What? These things really interest me, but then I never remember them later. Hopefully this match is fine connection-wise. I'm told that the bar connections that people are seeing are pretty bad, like completely non-representative. Santir vs. DeWolf was 1 bar and yet smooth. You just saw that one technically smooth. No way to know, but here we have one of the rougher matchups that we often see, both because the players' styles and the flow of the characters versus each other. G's pushback abilities mean that Mika has to use her quick drop kick a lot more often. And it's very annoying to have to use this move because when it whiffs, you often get messed up for using it in specific ways. Specifically, G can hit like V skill or dash in certain places and cause things and so on. Meaning that Mika's main options are to just hit dropkick, like not charged. You're in close range neutral, you've gotten pushed out or pushed yourself out, you just hit dropkick and then hold that forward. Why does this work? It's hard to explain why it works.
Round 1. Fight.
At this level, but it's mainly that while the move does not necessarily stop G from doing a lot, when the dropkick is not charged, it doesn't move Mika forward as much, but it can still crush counter a bunch of stuff people want to do. This also increases the amount of time the opponent has to spend thinking about whether or not any dropkick animation they see is going to be the charged one. And G is not so great at getting out of Mika's post dropkick stuff due to the relative lack of invincible options. Mainly therefore you're looking for pushback situations. G also can't really throw a lot of projectiles in this matchup because shooting Peach can be more or less used on reaction. And he can't keep on hitting buttons to make sure she doesn't dropkick because they'll whiff and that will happen.
Round 2.
These players are high enough level that you probably won't necessarily see the dropkick itself. The threat of the dropkick is in itself enough to cause the match to change without the dropkick needing to be used. But I expect it's going to have to come up at some point because slowly as you don't use the tool, your opponent recognizes, you know what, I might as well not care too much about this, or they go back into their own standard flows because it's not coming to mind, and they don't manage to get anywhere from there. Backing out is also a good way to get through this because you actually get to use the charged dropkick as a sort of a punish for things G wants to do. This is again for similar reasons to why the Akuma Light Demon Flip works. It's not that G isn't going to stop you.
Round 1.
It's more so that G doesn't stop you in a way that bothers you enough. I'm not sure if she would have made that one. The important thing to understand here is how long it takes for Mika's hurt bots to go forward when she's hitting this dropkick, especially the uncharged one. And G's tendency to have buttons that have only extended their own for a short period. This is not, however, something Justine is used to yet. And in the heat of battle, recognizing the situation where you're quote-unquote supposed to do it can be a push. Add to that the fact that you can sometimes know that if I focus on this, I'm just going to do it every time and then I'll get countered for that reason. And you have other things to work on sometimes. You could work on that like in a bot or in another situation. I'm not sure if G-bot actually sets up the situation required for this to be a really good thing to work on, because I don't think I gave it the crouch medium punch in those spaces, but you could probably mod it if you wanted it. That would be a Mika player specific thing though, since nearly no one else in the game even has this option. G can resolve the situation by hitting crouch medium punch and more or less cancelling into V skill. Not that you won't be punished for it, but it stresses Mika a lot more to have to perfectly time her dash through this V skill than the standard things that just, okay, you've hit enough stuff, therefore I'm going to hit dropkick now. She can do it. She can learn it. I'm not telling you to go out there and hit this against Knuckle Dude if you're facing a tournament, but it's still there as a way to increase stressors when that's what you need done. Tactically, this is often something you use when you have the life lead and are fairly interested in closing out the round, but expect you'll be able to anyway. Your opponent doesn't have a lot of meter or anything. You use those types of options then, because increasing your opponent's stress carries over between rounds, especially when they're down, when they don't have enough meter to make things really go their way, etc. Stressing them out then is probably among the best times you can stress them. And Nadeshko, as always, makes it a bad idea to do things other than block. 2 versus 1 continues to be unfair. Now the true test of internet as a generality. It's not going to be surprising to me if these two can't have their match. But it is definitely going to be surprising if they have a really smooth one. Either way, don't expect this one to play out in full. And given the way these two players play, there's not necessarily going to be a lot to talk about because of the fact that they just have so many tools to get around each other. The main thing Mika needs to think about is what we mentioned before though. Akuma has a lack of defenses at a certain space. And in this matchup, Akuma can't just demon flip because Mika can actually hurt Akuma a lot for doing the demon flip as opposed to other characters and get Oki and get setups. Full setups, not just like, oh, I get to do a meaty now. Like, I'll put you where I want you on the screen level setups. So, Akuma basically has to jump back or backdash, and Mika has to use that moment to activate the mic. So let's see how much they can keep up with this if they don't choose to just play footsies for 3 rounds.
Round 1. Fight! Round 2. Fight!
The sheer amount of tools these characters have to counter everything the other one does makes this match, at least for me, nearly impossible to actually call. I can't tell you what is going to happen or why most of it is happening. Tatsu in neutral, slide under Tatsu, forward heavy punch, wingless over. No, I'm not going to try. Just enjoy the fabulousness of this interaction.
Fight! Round 2. Fight!
One thing that is notable is that one of the biggest threats to Akuma in this matchup is actually that once Mika does have a decent amount of charge from that move, it's not often thought about, but Mika's wingless airplane is in fact technically also counted as a throw, and therefore you can get anti-aired for increasingly high damage the longer she holds the mic. Meaning that once you've got into certain situations, Akuma has to think a lot more about that as a whole. And that is partially why the Delight Demon becomes more of a danger to use. Because yeah, sometimes you feel like, oh, I got enough health. But unlike other things like G, where we mentioned before, oh, I'll just jump because you have to anti-air me and it'll give me the last bit I need for this. Akuma can definitely get away with that on a tactical level in a lot of places, provided the correct amount of meters, but Mika doesn't care enough. And when you do get like heavy charge mic wingless, it really hurts, both emotionally and otherwise.
Round 2. Fight!
Said, I can't say if the lag is enough to make us find underconfident in her ability to actually do the wingless, but she has been training it a lot in many situations, and was reaching a point where she could probably do it completely automatically in reaction to a lot of things, but I haven't seen any of those levels of reactions, so I'm going to assume it's either laggy or Sunterra is putting so much stress on her that she can't get herself to do it in that time. Obviously it could be both. But I can definitely say that the level of play is making it possible for that to be happening. I can't speak to the level of lag. Okay, I'm reasonably sure it's not the lag. Cross under EX wingless isn't something that just happens.
Let's do this.
One of the most powerful tools in Mika's kit against Nikali is her standing heavy punch. Lady Mika also can work in some of the same spaces, but just stand heavy punch as a generality.
Round 1.
Having V skill 2 obviously helps a whole lot as well, because if you think your opponent is going to try to chase certain types of neutral, you really can just parry and it will not do much. This is because Nikali must always move in specific ways. But Mika's stand heavy punch is a great whiff punish against a ton of things Nikali wants to do in this one, forcing Nikali to dash a lot more. But because Nikali doesn't have a whole bunch of great things that come from this dash, Mika can just jump forward, or even neutral jump sometimes, and get out of it a lot of stuff. So, while it's hard to physically do a lot of this, there's definitely a level of control here where Nikali's options don't get so much creative as they have to be thought about a lot more carefully. For example, Nikali's standard pushback string can't be used against V skill 2 Mika because she'll just parry it. And if she was wrong, the damage she takes isn't usually too terrible. It's also quite a long parry, so you don't really care that much most of the time. Whiffing in neutral to try to catch Mika coming forward or whatever also doesn't work well because of the capacity for the whiff punish for the stand heavy punch. Forces Nikali to use a lot more meter in the matchup, whereas Mika gets away because she really only has to think about 2 to 3 buttons for more or less all of it. Whenever she feels like slowing down and just, you know, no need try. I don't feel like trying to get in on you. I don't feel like trying to win by outplaying you heavily. I should just concentrate on when I need to hit, stand heavy punch, and parry. And aside from that, it's a matter of getting in and out of the throw game, which is the hard part technically. Nikali's better options in this space therefore become lows, because parry doesn't help against lows. First of all, the spacing she wants to be at is also better, and Nikali's lows are less whiff punishable, particularly because obviously her stand heavy punch tends to swing in a way upward that would mean, oh, you don't really get to do that. Going to the other station, we're like a round behind, which is interesting because it's not playing fast enough. Oh well, maybe I have to roll around. But it's not that you only use the lows, it's that using the lows allows you to do other things. And since Nikali's stomp functionally also counts as not necessarily a low, but for whatever reason, its targeting means that if it hits Mika out of her parry instead of being parried, Nikali has options. It's just going to be a little bit of time to get used to the muscle memory required for, okay, this character requires me to use my legs and not my arms, and therefore their defense is better. Because that's what's really going to happen here. Because defense is either going to be better because you can't trigger footsies, or because you have to rely so much on lows, which don't do a ton of damage and don't get you a ton of setups. That said, once Nikali has settled into this, he can absolutely win this by footsies, knows to keep you quiet while he sometimes even walks up for command grab. He doesn't even have to dash sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's stressful enough to make call-outs a thing, to make things difficult for Necalli overall. And it's most likely that these two need to fight quite a lot more. We've been trying to arrange for Justine to get to fight more people, because she's definitely the sort of player that a lot of us need practice against. But as for our stream, we're most likely ending it probably on this one. I don't want it to be sudden and we think we're gonna get a whole Amara match and then not get one. So, yeah, we started late. We are ending somewhat late. This will be our last on-stream match of the night. The lounge is a little up in the air actually. We have a lot of people, so it's likely to stay open for that reason, but it might not be the same host. Rune Siren may shift out after her match against whoever. Maybe not, depending on if she wins and so on. But I would say that tonight, don't necessarily come looking for the lounge or expect to be able to join it if you're watching. Just, I hope you enjoyed the matches overall. Tomorrow we will try to get some Guilty Gear. The situation may not lead to it. The same factors that cause late start tonight may cause no start tomorrow.
Round one.
And I believe on Wednesday we are back around to probably hosting Buffalo FGC tournament on this stream in case you want to. Just, it's easier of course to just go hang out with them on their stream. But, you know, if you're passing by and just remembered us, then you can obviously watch there until you remember why you went for theirs or whatever. You should probably check out from them where they're on demand
Round two.
On Thursday is almost certainly going to be 60 times Dead or Alive content, and Friday I'm gonna go so far as to assure you that you will get a Dalsim bot to look. Possibly the full disc guidance, I should have it ready by then. Dalsim bot is hard because there's a lot of variants that need to be tested. Different characters need to deal with different tools that Dalsim uses, and Dalsim, of course, does be skill in different directions based on the opposing character and so on. So there's a lot of, I need to change this particular input this time so it works this way or that way. But Dalsim also has a lot of command normals that make this hard. So when we're done testing all of those variants, hopefully something will come out of it. If not, I'll just release the one that we know works and update the data later. After all, there are no bots rushing to be placed. Danbot is probably ready already. I really do just plan to input what I've got in mind for that bot. The only thing I need to know is how good his sweep is, and from there we'll know what to do.
Round one. Fight.
Unless, of course, Dan is going to be redeemed as a character by giving him the most badass V-trigger ever. I can't even imagine what this is going to be. But it is good that we finally have him in a game where his style itself can be quote-unquote weak, but he still has the potential to be a really effective and strong character in some way. Hopefully, it's not going to be one of those, okay, now Dan transforms like Necalli and gets all these brave data changes to become true Psycho, because while that would be interesting, it would also be really hard to make a bot for, and possibly kind of against the spirit of Dan as a character. But Dan does have some over-the-top ridiculous belief style things. And since he doesn't necessarily have more than one CA, and I'm really doubting, though Zaku would make me less certain of this, I'm doubting that we're getting his Hisho Buraiken as the trigger, as that's kind of boring. We'll see what happens there. Assuming that Dan's V trigger fits into at least some basic options that I believe are available, Dan bot will be ready very quickly, and if it's fabulous and nothing like what I expect whatsoever, then hopefully the bot will take longer but be really good. But of course, after Dalsim bot, you can almost certainly look out for another Mish-Mashing. I'm going to think it's going to be Mish-Mashing because I don't think it's going to change within that time. We normally have mix and mash on weeks where the game tells you win 10 battle round matches because they're more likely to be more people around who will accept players that they consider to be lower ranked for longer periods. And that tends to be decent on a Monday. All the people who didn't get a chance to get that timing during their weekend. You'll find all our bots at 2-mk.org. This is of course for Street Fighter 5. If you want to find the bots for Under Night, you need to put in ulist-bots, or use the navigation. Obviously the website doesn't require you to do things. Our DBFC bot is more so one bot, but you can check it for which characters to use for your practice and so on. Guilty Gear exercises are also available. We're still not really promoting DOA bots because you can't even play matches without losing them after you've input them, so we'll wait longer on that. And you can find all the information on our stream times and announcements for stream, usually around the time of stream, at 2_mk_FGC on Twitter. But since we can't be sure that this match is going to work in the first place, we are heading out for the night. This has been Rillian 14 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.